When we were kids, my brother and I used to have a game. We had a fire-breathing dragon that was fighting to death with a giant. And we spent a lot of time trying to calculate how long exactly it's going to take for the dragon to entirely incinerate the giant. And all this was reality for us. It was our social truth. It existed between the two of us. Today, our species, all the 7.8 billion humans on this planet, are going through also a journey, an adventure with a lot of obstacles and dangers. We know a lot about it as scientific truths, but not as part of our social reality. So I thought we should have an experiment. We human apes have been using tools for a very long time. We started off a few million years ago with twigs and stone axes. Today, the largest tool we use is the global economy. And by employing it, we created a collapse of the biosphere. This is a scientific truth, but somehow not part of our social reality. It is not a social truth for us. We also know, scientifically, that inequality in our societies is unnaturally high, especially in the global society. A scientific truth, but not a social truth. We know that economics is an exchange ideology that makes us very unhappy. A scientific truth, which is not a social truth. So I wondered, would it be possible to bring scientific truth and social truth closer to each other? I invited all my friends to a 24-hour birthday lecture, a very social event, and I thought we could have a discussion about some scientific facts about ourselves, about our species. But because it's a social setting, maybe that in itself would be enough to bring scientific truth and social truth closer to each other. Okay, what do you see now? Do you see...
Now we see just the slide, the main slide.
Just the slide?
Yes.
So you don't see my notes around it?
No.
Yes!
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, we're done. We can all go home now.
All right, we can go on. All right.
Zoom.
So this is the first lecture, the first segment of the lecture, which asks whether we got this planet by accident. Before that, I should really deal a little bit and give you a little bit of where I'm coming from. We can always ask, okay, we are here, obviously, with these minds to process all this information around us, and that's given that's the condition. We seem to be very likely to ourselves, but it's very difficult to assess how likely we actually are. Yeah, how likely is it that we end up on a planet and running a planet like the way we are running this planet, or the way we are really the gardeners, increasingly the gardeners of a human zoo, of an organic zoo. We're part of this organic zoo. So here's a little bit of the usual exercise around this. Yeah, so let's say there are one planet in 100 solar systems that has life on it of any form, possibly quite larger, but okay. And let's say that each one of these, you need 100 of these for one to have complex life. And let's just leave complex life as that vague thing. And then you have 100 complex lives to have technologically advanced civilizations. I'm going to show you that I have a major beef with this idea, because I think the bit I can see is much, 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 much less likely than that. So anyway, so that would mean that we would have, let's say, about 1,000 technologically advanced complex life in just our galaxy, the Milky Way. So usual say, oh, it must be packed, yeah? And you move ahead a little bit and you multiply with the number of known galaxies, and that makes up a very large number. That's 2, 0, 0, 0, many zeros. of civilized, intelligent planets in the universe. So not really unique at all. We are likely than not, of course, then we always have to divide by the number of planets in the universe, and sometimes it's a tiny, tiny number, but still, it's a possibility. But I have an issue with this, and the issue came in Chile. I was once invited to look at the stars and this wonderful planetarium where the astronomers were having a laser pointer and actually pointing at the sky. So quite literally using the universe as the PowerPoint. Pretty cool. And that's where I really learned about how unlikely it was that the particular planet-moon setup with a hot core and tectonic plates moving is happening. And it is much, much less likely than 1 in 100 over 100 over 100, or 1 in 100 over 100. So, because that particular pattern gives the kind of cycles that then affects the life on Earth. But what I'm going to show you a little bit later, that what I also learned in the course of the past few years of being an evolutionary anthropologist, is that those cycles were crucial for our species to step out and sort of get the planet, which is the current situation. Right, so the answer is going to be not that likely. We are not that likely at all. But before that, I need to go back a little bit for a personal step back and show you a little bit about myself. So it was about 13 years ago when I set out to figure out the global society. And what I wanted to know is why we are so very bad at foresight, at dealing with our problems. And I thought, if we can see ahead better, if we look ahead better, then we will be able to maybe find better solutions to our increasingly strong problems. So I'm not sure how many of you know, before becoming a scientist, I used to run a macroeconomic consultancy. And so this double life was coming from very early on, because in university, I was studying three things. I was studying mathematical economics, I was studying evolutionary biology, and I was studying, believe it or not, I was studying to be a diplomat, and within that, Islamic fundamentalism. So you will see that all of these will pop in with different elements. So I'm quite aware that my personal story also results in a particular arc of humanity, which is silly, because clearly that's not how it happens. But anyway, so at that time, from some 23 years ago, for 11 years, I was running a macroeconomic consultancy that was forecasting countries. So think of this as a macroeconomy is an individual in a species that is the macroeconomy species. So each economy is an individual. So almost I was looking at a particular species, the macroeconomy species. There's quite an actually refreshing way of thinking about it. So if you come sort of this sideways, you have a little bit of different question. So one thing, for instance, that you can be interested in short-term behavior or long-term behavior. And so I was very much interested in long-term behavior, structural changes. And suddenly you look at growth theory. So there are, in macroeconomics, there are these relevant bits, corresponding bits for the behavioral question as well. Anyway, so I built a team. I was the head of the team, so I could always do the most interesting bit. And which was looking at long-term behavior of emerging markets. So this was much less like the next 12 months, which most of my colleagues did. I was looking ahead for 15 years, 7 to 15 years. And in this course of 11 years of running this company, I did research in 35 countries. So I looked at a lot of different individuals in these in the species of macroeconomy. And within that, of course, I was thinking a lot about foresight. So about how much you can possibly know anything ahead about a particular economy. So think of this as a little bit like a car driving on the motorway. Yeah? So when you understand how a car works, let's say, so you've got a functional model, then you are going to have a really good predictor for where the car is going to be the next second. So the self-movement of the car, even for the next 5 seconds. Yeah, and then it gets a little murky. So next minute, you already have, you can do quite a lot on the motorway, but you're still on the motorway. So the equivalent of these numbers in macroeconomics is looking ahead by 1 month or 6 months or even 18 months. 18 months is the equivalent of 1 minute of the car and the motorway is really quite far away, but still you're not too bad as long as you are on the motorway. But once there is a disruption and the motorway, it would be a car crash. In the economy, it would be the economic crisis. The predictions fail because suddenly the self-movement itself is not going to be enough to explain where that economy is going to be. So that is for societies that are sort of, we call them mature economies. So the societies that are not changing in structure, not changing very fast. So for those, you can run these models because the model structure is fixed. So whatever you observed in the past, you can actually interpolate towards the future. There's a self-movement because the structure is not changing. Think of emerging markets, not like a car driving on a motorway, but much more like a four-wheel drive that is driving on a field. So you need a four-wheel drive car, and you are rebuilding the car while you are driving. Yeah. So these economies were changing structure very, very fast. And we needed to understand how they are doing it so that we have some ability to look forward, to forecast. Yeah. And so I got specialized in that 11 years of predicting transition. So super interesting because every country I would go would explain to me, people would explain to me in every country, gosh, this place is unique. Yeah. So I would go to, Kazakhstan is unique. Wow. Morocco is unique. Brazil is unique. Indonesia is unique. Every country was telling me that it was unique. Of course, there were some unique features in every place, but they were not really unique because there were a lot of shared characteristics in the way they were changing themselves. They were changing the structure. And what we wanted to know is how we could possibly predict this structural change. And there were some really funny elements in this. I don't know. So I would go and see people all the time. I would arrive and see the central bank vice governor responsible for research, the finance minister or the deputy finance minister, a lot of the local political leaders, the local economist, FT guy, everybody who thinks about the local economy. And so I want to share. I will have these anecdotes in this whole lecture to wake everybody up, and maybe myself. So I had two anecdotes from this that I really loved. One happened in Morocco. So my team would always give me a sheet of who I'm going to meet and when, and so I would arrive and show up for 1-hour meetings and leave. And in Morocco, I was seeing the deputy governor of the central bank responsible for research, and my team just assumed that the deputy governor spoke English, but he did not. He only spoke French. And by then, I hadn't spoken French for 10 years, something like that. And when I did, it was one particular summer when I spoke a bit more Spanish than before. It was very much involved flirting in a library. So then much of my active French that I was able to go down while talking to the deputy governor of the Moroccan Central Bank was flirtation French. And this was like a man with a mustache at age 60. It turns out that he had exactly the same memories from Paris. So we giggled for an hour exchanging flirtation terms for Paris. And of course, I learned a lot afterwards from him because then it opens up. There was a similar story, but it was in Brasilia. So I'm showing up to also see the deputy governor of Central Bank, and so I'm on the way, or the morning, I got a message that my assistant was sending me, that they were sending to her, that there's a strike at the central bank. Like, what? Anyway, there's a strike at the central bank, and so I shouldn't be deterred. So I write, okay, so I imagine this kind of picket line, and I'm going to be. They said there's going to be a picket line. So this was a Brazilian picket line. So let's say about a 1.5 kilometer long picket line. So if you had to walk through this line of shame, but it was not a line of shame. It was a bunch of people having a party, and their method of trying to deter you from going inside the building was flirting with you. So it was just wonderful. Anyway, so all this process of going all around the world and trying to figure out how societies change, there was a particular trick of how we learned that how a society works. So what we would do is that let's say, all right, we're covering a new country, let's say South Africa. So we read up, obviously, the country, visited the country, not to be too stupid, of course. Go to the museum, engage with the general culture, with the cuisine, understand what the society is. So a lot of people who work on these macroeconomic forecasting forget that element, which is, yeah. And then we would look at the other teams that are already amazing predictors. And so, Reuters has these competition rankings. We would just go up to the top ones. Usually there's a bunch on the top that are really good every year, and there's a break, and then all the rest. And on the bunch of the top are pretty much very efficient compared to each other. So there's never really the best team. They're learning from each other. So we would go up, and we would have the objective to learn from the very best set of people who are predicting that economy. And this is a very friendly culture. So people would teach each other. They would teach us as well. So we would learn the logic of their models. We would reproduce their forecasts, and then make it better. So with this method, we got several forecasting awards, and we got involved around the world, involved in this forecasting discussion. And of course, in all of this, there were two important bits that I need later. One was constantly thinking about forecasting and what time means in forecasting. And the other one was this bit that you need to learn from somebody when you're forecasting. So this this system worked really well. And so I did research in 35 countries. We had a real-time forecaster for 11 countries by the time of 2005. So 11 countries were well, we had one major weakness. So obviously, we were constantly looking at what was not working. How could we improve? And we were getting our global forecasts from another research team, from the research team of the big bank who outsourced their emerging market research to us. And very often we realized that the weakness of our emerging market forecasts were coming from the global economic forecast from the research team. So we kept making mistakes because of that. So I thought, why don't we build our own global economic model? We could just treat it as another country, the global economy as one country. And then we learn whoever is the best, we emulate it, build the model, get better, easy peasy. There was a problem. The problem was that we realized that there was no team that was doing an actual forecast for the global economy. So what every team at the time, so the IMF had a team, the Fed had a team, Deutsche Bank had a team. What they were doing is that they were adding up country level forecasts. So a bit like you look at all the counties in the UK, you have an individual macroeconomic forecast for each county. You add it up and say, this is my UK forecast, or the same thing for each state in the US, separate forecast, and you add it up and say, that's the US forecast, or the same for Brasilia or India, or in Europe, yeah? So if you have regional European EU regions, each one a separate forecast, and then you add it up. It makes no sense. It's a bit like you have a football team and you try to predict how the football team is going to do at a championship by forecasting each player individually and then adding it up. So obviously the team forecast is going to be different. So it was not working. And this was the reason why the global models were so bad. They were not real global models, real global economic models. They were individual country models. And we very fast realized that the tricky thing of being a global economic model ourselves was that there was no such thing. It was like a giant emerging market that was in the process of happening. The structure was emerging. It was very, very difficult to capture anything about it. So we started to then say, all right, so what is it that we can do? And then we started to build a model. And then we forecast a model. We started to do a forecast. This was around 2004, 2005. And by the winter 2005, we realized that a giant crisis was coming. And it was really a weird time because at that time I don't know if you remember back, it was 15 years ago, it was a real boom time in the global economy. And everybody thought this is all the way up, 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 up. There's no other way. And there were very few teams only who said a crisis is coming. We were one of them. And every time I started to try to engage with this, and I talked to high-level decision makers and high-level investors, I say, okay, this is coming, then the crisis is coming, then the question would come back, all right, can you tell me when the crisis is going to hit? Of course, I would say, no, I don't know when exactly it's going to hit. And then it's okay, is it going to be the next 6 months? I really don't know, but it's coming and it will be big. And this would be it. So there would be no discussion beyond this. So clearly the idea that there is a crisis coming from an award-winning team, from a person who was regularly used to have foresight, just didn't matter as long as it was not in the immediate, in the bit of the economy that is really self-movement of the car. There were three types of predictions at the time. One was around the US derivatives market melting down. The other one was the global current account imbalance. And the third one was around the misperception of the third, mostly about how this emerging market concept just doesn't really work. But all the three had one shared element. And this shared element was that the global risk patterns would require some kind of, we need to understand where these global risk patterns are, and to forecast that, we need to have some kind of predictive power to predict the structure of risk that is out there. And we had no predictive power whatsoever. It's very interesting what happened in 2007 when the crisis did hit, because all the teams that were supposedly having a global model had suddenly seen their foresight go from 18 months to 12 months to 6 months to 1 month to negative. So in the 2007-2009 crisis, for a while in 2008, humanity had a negative foresight. We didn't know what was happening at the time. Very interesting. If you're thinking about what is our ability to see ahead and back, it's super interesting. And then came basically my change of skins. In November 2007, we organized a very large emerging market conference for our client, and where we had 260 top investors and top policymakers. And Raghu Rajan, who was just stepping down from the IMF, he gave an amazing talk about subprime, the coming subprime meltdown. This was November 2007, so 11 months before the meltdown. The coming subprime meltdown. He's now I think he's still the governor in the central bank. I had a panel with former emerging market crisis governors who saw their emerging markets, their countries melt down, and how they would respond. And I gave this group a first introductory tutorial about networks, yeah, and how there's a network spread of a crisis on a network. And then at the end, so we had the gala, because it's a very, very flashy conference, exactly the opposite of academic conferences. We had a gala in the Burj Al Arab, and I don't know whether you've been up to the Burj Al Arab ballroom. Is basically a two-story Viennese ballroom, but with Islamic art. So you cannot get flashier than that. You know, a man-made island, a hotel shaped of a giant sail that sails the world, and this incredible, somewhat over the top ballroom. And I invited a friend of mine who's the professor of Oxford, professor in Oxford of Roman archaeology, and he talked about the fall of the Roman civilization, which I think was the coolest thing I will have ever done. And then with that, I left the industry, and I decided, all right, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go back to the drawing board and try to think, what is it that we can know about humanity? What is it that we can know? So, in a way, and I became an academic and evolutionary anthropologist. And in a way, what is, this was a preamble, much longer than I planned it, but this is a preamble for where all the rest is coming from. And hopefully, if I'm still awake at the end of it, we will return back to all of these concepts of time and what time means for us. How time is we understand really behavioral time as a ritual. How we can actually understand some bits of the structure of our societies. And hence we might have a power we might be able to empower ourselves to be the gardeners of the planet. So, and with that, very much delayed, let's start. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about bonobos and chimps. To say the obvious, we are an ape species. we are one of three very closely related ape species. So the bonobos who live in the south of the Congo, so they are sort of the orange bit here, and the chimpanzees with several subspecies that live north of the Congo, West Africa. They are closest related to each other, next closest related to us. So they're much closer related to us than to the gorilla. And the gorilla is closer related to the chimps and us than to the orangutans. And this is an important bit because there's so much about bonobos and chimpanzees that is like us. And because we come from theological thinking traditions that kept telling us how we are different from the rest of the animal world. Yeah, we have the word human and animal, and we sort of assume that the animal is not human. So in sort of my bit of science, we call it the non-human animals now, which are really cumbersome. But we are obviously animals, and that has a lot of consequences because it seems that with the Durkheimian tradition, I will come back to this later, but with the Durkheimian tradition, we sort of think that we are free of all of that, and actually we are not. And so much of what I'm going to talk about is the story of the bits that we carry with us in terms of society building behaviors that we have. So chimps and bonobos have really complex cultures. This list is a simple list of cultural behaviors in chimpanzees. And so don't engage with, just engage with how long it is. And engage with the fact that the different columns are different chimpanzee populations. And there's a lot of variation among them. And so you're going to have some culturally learned chimpanzee elements that are always present, yeah? So you start to play, you can drag a branch, some of it has to do with tools. There are some others that are really unique, and there's a long list of cultural traditions in chimpanzees that are unique to each chimpanzee culture. It's a bit like the way there are a lot of traditions that are unique to each human culture. And these chimpanzee cultures vary tremendously. So if you look at this graph and you see what is going on here, these are different, a few key cultural behaviors picked out, and you can see the tremendous amount of variation among them. And there's something else is similar, is that chimpanzees are murderous bastards. So if you look at this slide, this is a slide of a story of a murder. These three guys on the left killed the guy on the right, and left him dead, which is not going to be that far away from us. Yeah. So if you, that's not, I presume everybody's seen the David Attenborough's chimpanzee hunting scene. Yeah, so I will not get into that. Oh, but the other thing is going on with these two guys, that they're very different from each other. I know that this is contradictory, that we are so similar to each other, but they are different to each other. They're different to each other in bits that is important for us, that we humans think is important. So chimpanzees are hierarchical, male-dominated and aggressive. Bonobos are somewhat smaller than chimpanzees, and they are female-dominated, peaceful, and much more leveled, much less steep hierarchy than the other guys are. So it seems that bonobos and chimpanzees will be able to tell us some bits for who we are as a species, but definitely not other bits. So we will need to ask very carefully about unique human behaviors, but always asking, okay, is that behavior an evolved behavior? And then we need to ask, that evolved behavior, can we find that in chimpanzees and bonobos? Is that true for our little cluster of great apes? Or is it unique for us. And I think this is a very important preamble before we get to ourselves, because we need to always, what I kept understanding, we always need to ask this question. The first papers that I wrote as a scientist, I would send it to a biology journal principle that I'm always going to publish in biology journals. And then friendly editors would send it back saying, this is a social science paper, this is an economics paper. So, well, and I would write back saying, oh, I really want to publish it here. And they would say, right, okay, talk about other primates as well. And in that process, I learned, I thought I knew about primates, but I didn't know about primates as humans being one of the primates. And once I did that routinely, then suddenly people would start asking, talk about primates are boring, extend these points beyond primates. And it was really educating to start engaging with this depth of human evolution and social behavior. And I think everyone who engages with human behavior should be really doing that. So anyway, so now we get to our line that's separate from the chimpanzees and bonobos, and it sort of goes back to a giant question mark. So we don't really know what happened, because there's a very long period in human evolution. We know that the split between chimpanzees and bonobos happened around 8 million years ago. This number is contested, because essentially what you do is you look at the difference, the divergence in the DNA. The tricky thing about it is that you always have to assume a particular rate of mutations, and you sort of go for the neutral bit of the DNA, and you're never really certain that's anti-neutral. And also you don't know how long a generation length is. And you will see later that I have done some work on the generation length. I really don't know what the generation length is. So as a consequence, it's a little question mark, when was the exact split? But then let's say there was a split from the chimpanzees and bonobos, well, their line, around 8 million years ago. And then for quite a bit of time, we have no other data than occasionally bits of skull and bone just stayed around. So really dotted thing. So anyway, so somewhere around 6 million years ago, somewhere in Kenya, there are lakes. We know that from the different carbon isotopes in the teeth, mostly. And there were lakes, and there was somebody living there. I mean, that's, and then 4.5 million years ago, there was this guy, Ardi. I will come back to Ardi later today. I will show you some amazing picture in the library. We're going to change, oh, sorry, side note, we're going to change locations at some point. Some of them are going to be quite exciting. And so there was this guy, Ardi, and the Ardi, about 4.5 to 5.5 million years ago, was very special because Ardi was a little bit of a biped. There's entire conferences dedicated to the extent Ardi was a biped, and why Ardi was a biped, I don't really care about that much. That for this particular story, the point is that occasionally Ardi was a biped already up. So there are some weird explanations of it was just the right length to stand in the branches. Who knows? Anyway, so this is Ardi without fur. So you can see that Ardi's body is quite different from ours. And when you look at its legs, you can see that it's sort of climbing in the branches. This particular depiction shows this explanation, this hypothesis that it was a biped to sort of walk on the branches while holding on. And why I really like this possible explanation, I really want to ask why the other primates don't have this, apart from one lemur maybe, and don't you need particular spaced branches for this? So anyway, so we don't know. I don't know. And then we get to much closer to our line. And I'm about to make some points about tools that about 3.5 million years ago, suddenly there were tools, very clearly tools, but they were stone tools. And in fact, maybe this is the point to stop, because I realized that I'm eating into the chat time. So, okay, so shall we chat?
Yeah, Tamas, and I think it's my turn to moderate the chat. Good morning, everyone.
Max, good morning to you.
So I'm reporting from Leiden. You're reporting from where?
San Francisco.
Wonderful.
Good evening. I'm also on the sort of the West Coast. I'm in Phoenix, so it's almost 10 here.
It's we started at 5 a.m. here, so not as bad as Tamas' situation, 4 a.m. But yeah.
Happy birthday, Tamas, by the way.
Oh, no. Yeah, thank you.
Got a little.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Oh, nice.
Hi from San Francisco. Hey, you guys. So nice to see so many familiar faces. Great idea,
Tracy. Hi, Tracy.
Hey.
More San Francisco people.
Yeah.
There are a lot of San Francisco people.
It's the time zone, right?
And who else is here?
Hi, I'm Sarah Megan. I'm in LA.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
I see we got the same idea for attire.
Good evening, attire.
That's right.
Yeah, so good morning, Oxford.
Hello.
Hello.
The Human Bee series is about understanding who we are as a species, so that we can equip ourselves to take responsibility for the planet. Because if we humans are not going to do that, there's nobody else who's going to save the biosphere. If you'd like to be part of this conversation, please subscribe here now.